Travis Ricciardo, I am super excited to share this episode that we've got in store today with the one and only Aluminium Alan Clark.
Alan is, I'm just a massive Alan Clark fan. Alan heads up, CM Group, which provides a wealth of industry research and insights on various commodities. But Aluminium Alan is Aluminium Alan because aluminium is where he just knows everything.
I know you're a big fan, and the Money Miners are big fans as well, because we had Al on about 2 years ago, maybe 18 months ago, and the episode got fantastic feedback. The one of the big lessons is if you think aluminium is niche, you need to broaden your horizons. It is huge. It's a massive industry, one of the biggest metals markets out there, and it has so many hands throughout the economy, throughout the globe. It's such a fascinating market. And as you can sort of glean from this episode, we could chat with Alan for hours and hours and hours about this. And there is a timelessness to the conversation that we have. He's got so much knowledge from his decades of experience in the industry, but it's also hyper relevant for what's going on right now as we speak due to the Iran crisis and the amount of aluminium that comes out of the Middle East. We're seeing Bahrain and other countries like that. So there's some huge lessons to be learned. Aluminium, the price has just hit a 4-year high. So it really pulls at both of those sort of strings of timeless content and a conversation that'll give you a bit of edge in the markets today. And I'm excited to share it, mate.
Super excited to share this one. Let us know what you think of it. JD, what else should we be excited to share?
We should be excited to share the great name of Sandvik Ground Support, the greatest ground support in the industry. Our loyal partners, we are tremendously thankful for the work they do in the industry and the support they provide for us. If you operate a mine, if you work within a mining organisation, underground mining, or even open pit, and you just want to chuck in an order, then you should get in touch with the fantastic team at Sandvik Ground Support. You can do it either by contacting Derek Hurd and the rest of the team there, or the Wicket app that they have is a great way to put your regular orders in.
You know what ground support is known for? Well, it's known for holding the ground up, obviously.
This is true.
They also hold up money of mine, mate, with the wonderful support they provide us. If you need something to be supported, I think probably ground, get in touch with Sandvik Ground Support.
Go Sandvik. On to our chat with Alan.
Alan Clark, Aluminium Alan, you are a fan favourite. When I say fan favourite, I mean me as a fan. I'm
Good. One fan. Good.
Count me in there. There's two.
We just love your perspectives on the commodity world, your intimate knowledge of aluminium, your deep and profound insights about China and the evolving kind of commodity landscape. Last time you joined us, you blessed us with really pertinent insights on the entire aluminium history, its rise through time, and how that had evolved. You've joined us again, and the landscape hasn't stopped changing. Not long after you came, things changed really, really quickly.
They did. Pretty much the moment I walked out, I think, things started to change. Guinea. I mean, we as bauxite and alumina analysts, we've been raging bauxite bulls for a long, long time, right? And in 2024 and last year in 2025, I mean, we still undercalled Guinea, by millions of tons. So I mean, in 2025, China imported 200 million tons of bauxite, and it's like 140, 150 of that was from Guinea. And this year it'll probably go up again by another 10% or so, we think. So it just continues to grow. And Guinea, I think Guinea's now 70-odd%, 75% of imports of bauxite into China. So it's crazy.
So this is a roughly 400 million tonne overall market.
Yeah, a bit bigger than that now, but of that order. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that one thing, I went back, by the way, and had a look at the podcast last time and made a few notes of all the things, the questions I either avoided or just went down a rabbit hole and forgot to come back to. But one of them was that, when we talk about bauxite as analysts, we always talk about dry metric tonnes. Whereas if you're talking about shipping it, it's almost always wet tonnes. So when I say 140, 150 million tonnes or 200 million tonnes, I'm always talking dry. But somebody will come along and go, oh, hang on a minute, the number's actually closer to 230 million, or whatever it is, because it includes the moisture. And so a lot of the figures that are, that are out there you know, you got to figure out whether they're wet or dry. And I remember we did talk about liquefaction, right? About, you know, what can happen in vessels because bauxite, the moisture content can be pretty high in some bauxite. So I'll clear that one up to start with. The other one, by the way, I know, Trev, you asked me the question, how many tonnes of bauxite does it take to produce a tonne of alumina and then to aluminium? And I just completely, I don't know what I talked about, but I didn't give you the number. The rule of thumb is 5-2-1, right? So 5 tonnes of bauxite, roughly, 2 tonnes of alumina, 1 tonne of primary aluminium. Varies a bit depending on the grades of bauxite. It can be, you know, as high as 6, but roughly.
I like rule of thumbs.
Yeah, helps just kind of...
They do. Help frame things.
Yeah, that's right. So
what caused the alumina price to surge so sharply in early 2025?
Well, if you go back and have a look at the history of the alumina price outside of China, just for now, right, that things happen. I mean, it's more or less balanced, but when you get a shock to the system or, you know, 2 or 3 things that happen together, you can push the price high pretty quickly. So if you go back maybe, I don't know, I think 2018, 2019, when there was a big shutdown at Alunorte, which is the biggest alumina refinery outside of China, the price just galloped, right, because they shut down half the capacity. And at the same time, the market was a little bit short anyway. So it doesn't take much for this to have a compounding effect, right? So last year, there were some planets already starting to align. Shutdown here of Kwinana. Rio called force majeure in Queensland on gas supply, I think, from memory. Yep. There was a disruption in Brazil. So these things started to come together. And then in China, if I remember correctly, China's smelting sector is exposed to hydropower in some regions, you know, particularly in Yunnan. So depending on how brutal the season is, you might have hydropower and you might not. And if you don't, then you actually, you know, you shut down some smelting capacity. But last year, there was plenty of rain, plenty of water, so it all kept going. So that the demand in China was a little higher than it had been for the last few years. So alumina demand in China high, all these other things starting to happen. So the price had just started to creep up. And then, of course, Guinea, right? We saw what happened with GAC. And there were some other disruptions in Guinea. And I think it was for the first time the industry kind of looked at it and thought, you know, had a bit of an oh shit moment because it was, actually, alumina is becoming tight. And if we cannot get the bauxite, and we're now so, you know, dependent on Guinea, if we can't get the bauxite, then we're going to need, we could run out of alumina. I mean, there's nothing worse, right? You don't want to shut a smelter down because you can't get alumina. That's a disaster. So the price just started to track higher and higher, quicker and quicker, and the bauxite price went as well. So, you know, at that time, I think bauxite price and alumina price both set records, you know, during that spike, and then proceeded to come down, you know, just as quickly, not quite as quickly, but it came down pretty quickly into, you know, Q1, Q2 of last year to where we are now, where bauxite prices are into the cost curve. Right, and the alumina price is well into the cost curve right now. In our numbers, you've probably got 40% of the alumina refining sector globally underwater. It's a hell of a turnaround, right, in a short amount of time.
But the aluminium price has performed really well over the last 3 or 4 months. So how do you piece that?
Kind of weird, isn't it?
Yeah, very weird to me.
The thing that it does show is the value of the integrated model, right? Yeah. So if you bauxite, alumina, primary aluminium. This time last year, your bauxite and alumina business was doing fantastically, smelting not so good. Now it's the complete reverse of that. But the primary aluminium price, I mean, commodities are moving, right? And there's a lot of speculation in prices as well. You can see that in copper prices and prices and other prices, and there's that in aluminium as well, and it's being pulled along. Plus, the demand just keeps. The demand for aluminium is just, like I said to you last time, it's just slow burn. It's just always going up, and the world needs kind of one smelter, at least one new smelter, primary aluminium every year. And right now we've got the cap in China. We'll come back to that, I'm sure, the 45 million tonne cap.
Definitely.
But that's you can't get it out of China anymore. So now what? So the demand stays strong. You've got a lot of speculation. It's starting to tighten up, and the aluminium price starts to have a run.
To that point there, Al, on the integrated, just a quick question. There has been the question thrown up in recent times, does Rio, for instance, do they really need to be fully integrated? Do you have strong thoughts on being integrated versus not?
No. Well, I less so than I did, if you go back 10 years or more, where, there was no such thing as an alumina market. There was no such thing as a bauxite market. You go back 6 or 7 years, it was all, China aside, right, for now, that, bauxite and alumina was vertically integrated. It was the mine-mouth refinery model. The alumina refinery is built to treat the bauxite. So there was no separation between the two. So even to have that kind of conversation, to think about, well, should it be integrated or not integrated? I mean, people just laugh at you. You crazy. But now China has broken that model. It's not so much an integrated model now as it is like a merchant model, where the bauxite is procured, kind of third party. Not all of it, but enough of it to make it a meaningful third party market. So, do I have a preference? Not so much now. I mean, I kind of look at it. We were talking about cost curves before, right? So, if you're sitting low enough on the global bauxite cost curve, you're sitting low enough on the alumina curve, you're sitting low enough on the primary aluminium curve. What a great business if you're in all three. But they're good standalone businesses as well now, whereas that wasn't the case when you go back 10, 15 years or so.
This all makes me feel so young in the industry because you don't have to. I mean,
makes me feel the opposite, by the way. But anyway,
experienced was you're talking about 5 or 10 years, and I think about other huge changes like the free floating of the iron ore price that happened in 2010.
Yeah.
These are all very relative recent changes to the structures of these markets. So it's amazing, and a lot of it spurred on by what China has done.
China front and centre.
It's wild.
Wouldn't have it without them.
Yeah,
these markets wouldn't have developed the way they've developed. I mean, the index pricing, the commoditizing of these things from a pricing perspective just wouldn't have happened.
So Guinea wouldn't have happened either in the bauxite market. They went from, as we spoke about last time, 1 million tonnes per annum exporting to over 100 million.
Well, Guinea has always been quite a significant bauxite exporting country. Say 15 million tonnes, or there may be a bit more about that, because there has been one mine there in particular, CBG, which has been going for decades, but it was integrated in that sense that the bauxite was going to refineries in Canada, Spain, Ireland, that were based on that bauxite, and it was integrated. So the Halco partners, which is Rio, Alcoa, and so forth, it was that bauxite to that refinery. So no trade. Just, good quality bauxite into a purpose-built refinery. But for China, in 2015, China imported 1 million tonnes of bauxite from Guinea. And, last year they did, whatever the number was, 170, something crazy.
Remarkable.
But absolutely incredible. Yeah.
Their dependence on imported bauxite, at what point does that become a strategic vulnerability for them?
Well, I think it's gone past that already. But remember, it's also it goes both ways. It's a vulnerability for the industry for sure to have that concentration of supply in one country. But you got to remember that Guinea is just as reliant on China as China is on Guinea. Without China, Guinea doesn't have a bauxite export business, an industry. It wouldn't exist, right? So they rely on each other in that sense. So and now we're starting to see more investment in the alumina sector into Guinea, which is another, I think a further kind of commitment by the Chinese to for long-term supply of bauxite.
This is the value add in country. Government ambition that Guinea has witnessed.
Much more of an ambition. I mean, when you go back in time, look at some of the conventions that have been struck over the years. The bauxite miners and exporters in Guinea, most of them have a requirement to build a refinery. That's clear. It's clear in their agreements.
These were agreements struck when they got the mining license to begin with? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So this is not a surprise that what we're seeing now is that the government is being more assertive in its approach to have these companies build refineries. I mean, it's going to happen. And it was always going to happen according to the conventions. It's just that, the Guinean authorities prior to, the current administration had not been assertive in that sense. They let them get away with not having to build refineries, and those days are over.
It's all
so
changed.
they're coming.
Yeah.
They're coming.
Are they coming in enormous scale, or is it going to be piecemeal?
Well, we'll get to Indonesia in a minute because we want to talk about scale, what's happening in Indonesia right now. But I think we'll see 3 refineries in Guinea, in the next 5 years, but possibly more. And how big would they be? I would think at least 1 million tonnes each. So let's say that meant 3 or 4 million tonnes of alumina. That's 10 plus million tonnes of bauxite consumed in country that, by the way, probably wouldn't go to China. So is that enough to move the dial? Well, if we're talking imports into China of 200 million, 10 million stays in Guinea. Is it enough to move it? Probably not.
I've got a rule of thumb on the cost of building a refinery.
Capital cost?
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's, this is talking about this to the guys this morning about something that we're starting to see in China with respect to their metallurgical construction companies, because this is a really important development. I think that those companies that were building alumina refineries and smelters and metallurgical equipment and facilities in China are now starting to do that more and more outside of China. Right? We've seen it in nickel with what's happened in Indonesia. Now we're seeing it in bauxite alumina. So I say that to preface the numbers, right? So if you're going to build use the China model to build an alumina refinery, say in Indonesia, then on our numbers that's probably around $1,000 US per annual tonne. Right? So for 1 million tonne refinery, that's $1 billion.
Yeah.
Right? Of that order. Now, if you're going to brownfield that, which most of them do, it's probably less than half that.
Okay.
Right? So on average, it's it's a low number. And it's fast. I mean, the other thing, you guys know better than I do when it comes to project economics, that if you can get that refinery built in 18 months or less compared with 2.5 years, and you've got a cash flow in month number 13 or 14,
Huge
that
difference.
has a massive impact on the value of that project. And so it's not just the capital cost, it's the speed with which it can happen, because it is a replication model. Right? So low capital cost, quick build, and then, for the right, for a good grade of bauxite, it's low operating cost as well. So you're kind of winning on all three. We had a look at the cost curve earlier of where, those new Indonesian refineries would sit on our numbers, Q1.
These are
on the China build, right?
these are firmly Q1, right? Like this cost curve, it looked pretty flat to me, and then Q1 displacing a lot of other stuff in Q1 are these Indonesian refineries that are freshly built.
Yeah, yeah.
What about them is gives them a cost advantage even versus the equivalent technology that's deployed in China?
Oh well, I mean, a lot of the Chinese. This is going to test how close you were looking at that cost curve now, right? Because some of the refineries in China are low cost. They're Q1, and they're Q1 because it's domestic bauxite.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
It's down the road.
It's having to import it versus
So relative to the vast majority of refineries in China that are importing bauxite, so they've got a massive exposure there. So now compare that with Indonesia, where you're getting bauxite. It's going to be barged. It doesn't have to travel halfway around the world like it does, from Guinea. So you've got a cost advantage there, and then depending on the grade of the bauxite, caustic soda consumption, but also energy. And so if you're winning on all of those three cost drivers, then that's how you end up in Q1, right?
When you say this China model, my head automatically thinks the Western price is 2x that. And I think everything you just said kind of
For
confirms
capital
that.
cost?
Capital costs, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I'd say for alumina refineries, it's less than a third.
Yeah. I mean, we were hearing similar anecdotes when the Indonesian build out of these Chinese designed HPA facilities came along. Just the absurdly, kind of, that they were not insanely capital intensive like we'd believed they would be, and they happened extremely fast, and they were being built out for less than a third of the cost of anyone in the West could do. And it was technology that was miles above anything in the West in HPAL. Is the technology so far ahead on their refineries versus our refineries?
What I was going to say, I think a better example here is actually smelting.
Right.
Right. So rather than refining, the answer to that question is yes. But if you think of it from smelting, I mean, what are the drivers of cost for aluminium smelting? It's energy consumption, right? And like the life of the cell, right? Because it could be 5 years or 7 years. Or pulling a cell out and then having to rebuild it and put it back in, that's high cost. But the energy consumption is the key as well. I would argue that the Chinese smelting technology is now world's best in terms of energy consumption. It's maybe a bit early to tell about pot life because you need 5, 6, 7 years of data to be able to say that what the pot life's like. But they are world class, and which is why I think it's going to be difficult for smelting projects in the West now to attract the funding, given that you can build an equivalent primary aluminium smelter using Chinese technology for half the capital cost, and to build it quicker. I think we're kind of at that pivot point now for the aluminium industry going forward. That we're going to see smelters built by Chinese companies in jurisdictions that are kind of China friendly, so that Indonesia or Middle East or wherever it is. But that I think is going to be the model of the future.
It's a bad spiral we're in, and it's not just the aluminium industry. It goes far beyond that. On the flip side of that, you referenced earlier the older Guinean mine would send product to Canada, Spain, and a few other spots. From memory, looking at the cost curve, they're now the downstream parts that are much higher on the cost curve.
They are,
and that's because of energy policy and older technology.
Correct.
Is that right?
Energy policy, and they are old plants, and their maintenance costs, their labour costs, they're all high, and so they are exposed.
And then we have Indonesia. They're coming in the bottom, like Trav said as well.
Yeah.
And that, as we spoke about last time, doesn't kind of come from nowhere. I think Australia comes into the conversation now, and we've seen since we last spoke a shutdown here in Kwinana, the first of 3. Or I think it was paused and then officially written off last year. So where do we kind of piece into this conversation, and where do we piece into the conversation going forward?
Geez, I wish I knew. I mean, when you look at it just purely on competitive advantage, right? That here in Australia we have good quality bauxite, which is treatable using the Bayer process, and if you were to build a new plant today, it would be Q1, right? So, and if you looked at the 3 plants here in Western Australia, they are. If they were operating on the basis of which they were designed, and that means treating bauxite of the grade upon which they were designed, so that would be 30 plus alumina content, they would be Q1, right, or straddling Q1, Q2. I'd say Q1 if they were working, if they were at nameplate capacity and they were treating the bauxite for which they were designed, they should be Q1.
The reality is they're probably.
Well, the reality is, they're probably a little high because they've got some issues here, with accessing bauxite of the grade which they desperately need to get to maintain Q1, and to maintain their existence for the next decade and beyond. They need access to those sorts of grades of bauxite.
If I think of that cost curve again, like if these were
We'll be able to flash it up at this point. Right, on the screen.
these were Q1 refineries, and you explained the minutiae of why when we last spoke. But if they're being displaced by a rapid build out of capacity in Indonesia, there's Guinea build out on the horizon, and the middle sort of looks pretty dominated by Chinese capacity, which is pretty damn sticky, even when it's uneconomic in other industries, when you've got like downstream things. So is there a scenario where much of these previously kind of Q1 refineries can even become like economic? And is that a realistic scenario?
Over time,
yeah,
I think so. I mean, you pointed out something really important about that cost curve. It's flat, right? That midsection of where you've got the Chinese refineries that have been built probably over the last 10 years that are processing imported bauxite. They've got very similar cost structures. What's the difference? It's the same bauxite, so therefore it's the same BAR, bauxite to alumina ratio, so tonnes per tonne, same. Caustic soda consumption, pretty much the same. Energy consumption, so they're all similar in that sense. So the exposure comes to the refineries that are inland in China that once upon a time were processing domestic bauxite that now can't get that domestic bauxite because it's been depleted, so they're importing. So you can imagine now you've got an extra 150 RMB or whatever it is to get imported bauxite inland, and so that's why you see that that flat section of cost curve, and then there's a slightly higher where those exposed inland refineries are, and then you've got the rest of the world, the old capacity at the end. So, over time, I think the more capacity that comes on in Indonesia, that'll come on Q1. Guinea, it's hard to tell. I mean, Guinea needs an energy solution to be Q1, but the bauxite's obviously, high grade. So with the right energy solution, they could come on Q1 as well, in theory.
Energy solutions don't just spring about.
Don't just materialise. No, that's right. But whether that might
What's
be...
the most logical form?
I think for the refineries, probably LNG. Yeah, but over the longer term in Guinea, I mean, Guinea's got a lot of potential for hydroelectric power. And I mean, it's the source, right, for just about every large river in in that part of Africa. All starts in the Guinean highlands, so they've got potential to do that. And in fact, there's a plan that Guinea will have smelters in the future, so based on hydroelectric power.
So talking about smelters, we have to go back to China. They have famously had the 45 million tonne per annum production cap. That's been in place for around about a decade.
Yeah.
And
as somebody pointed out to me the other day, 45.43. I said, why is it 45.43? I don't know the answer. Although we suspect it's based on a consumption per capita kind of number.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's 45. And by the way, every company that produces primary aluminium has its own number. So some companies have already hit their cap. Right, and if you look at the number, I might be slightly wrong here, but it might have been 45.0 something million tonnes. So we're at the cap. We're at the cap now.
What happens next?
Smelters get built in other jurisdictions by Chinese metallurgical companies. That's my prediction, that we see, in Indonesia, we'll see, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 million tonnes of smelter capacity go in over the next 5 years or so, but I think we'll also see more capacity come into other countries that accept the China model, and that might be the Middle East, for example. We might see some big smelters go into the Middle East, which are based on Chinese technology.
But the cap is not budging?
Well, I don't think the cap budges. No, I mean, some people seem to think that it's a ridiculous policy, and China's would to do the right thing. They should relax it, but. You've got to ask yourself why it's there and what behaviour it's driving. It's there because to stop more smelters being built, energy consumption, which is important, environmental constraints as well, but also to encourage recycling, because China's got a long way to go to get up to the recycle rates of other countries. So it kind of makes, all the reasons the cap's in place, I think, kind of makes sense. And if you can then export the the construction and operation into other countries, why wouldn't you do that? And I think that's what we're going to see.
And does it improve the profitability of the smelters as well? Maybe unprofitable projects not going, or more marginal projects not going ahead, only the best going forward?
Smelting, you mean outside of China?
Actually, inside of China. I'm kind of getting at this broader anti-involution theme as well. Does it stop excessive competition?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's also a policy in China that, for older smelters that are running lower currents. So I think the number is like if you're running an older smelter that's 240 kA or below, then you are mandated to shut down. So that could be replaced with a new 600 kA smelter, and the capacity can be kind of horse traded, province to province, but so long as you're under the cap. So new smelters for old smelters, better efficiency and so forth. So I can see some more of that happening, but no, I think the cap holds.
The landscape you're kind of just describing.
Imagine this time next year we're sitting here and they're at 48 million tonnes.
Yeah. We'll just cut this bit out of the conversation.
Editing sweet floor for that. But anyway, sorry, go on.
To me, what you describe, and I don't know this sector nearly as well as you do, but it feels like you're describing one where the incumbents with old technology who don't have access to the Chinese capability or strategic supply in the countries that have new bauxite coming online are really in a bit of a dire predicament, given the capacity that's building out for cheaper and in favourable countries for the
smelting.
Chinese.
You mean smelting?
Yeah. Smelting, refining. Is that wrong? I hear what you're saying, and I think, what does that mean for Alcoa? What does that mean for Rio's aluminium business? It doesn't feel great.
No, I look. I think the way to think of it is that anywhere where you see a smelter, an aluminium smelting operating outside of China, whether it's in Brazil or the Middle East for that matter, or in Australia, wherever it might be, wherever there's a smelter, there's a power contract. Right, electricity contract. It's about a third of the cost is electricity.
Yeah.
Right? Now, as the original contract rolls off, it's got to be renegotiated, and typically that's renegotiated at a higher price and for a shorter amount of time. So it's kind of, you get a lifeline for a few years, and then another lifeline, and then another, and that's what we're seeing in Australia. You keep getting these lifelines because the moment you lose the power contract, it's game over.
Like your negotiating leverage has just disappeared because you've got the thing and you need the power.
That's right. But by the same token, a lot of the electricity grids, don't forget, need the stability that comes with a decent baseload like a smelter. I think people tend to underestimate the importance of that in a network as well. So, that plays a role. So there is some degree of negotiating on both sides. But interestingly, you see that South 32 has just announced Mozel's being shut down. I mean, you lose the power contract. What do? You're exposed, and that's what's happened. So I think you just see more and more of that as these contracts kind of roll off, and the demand for the electricity comes from other places. Data centers and whatever else it might be. It becomes a competition.
I'm glad you bring that up, because you see the stark numbers about the quantity of aluminium required, for multiple reasons, and the commissioning of the new smelters to actually produce that quantity of aluminium is incredibly energy intensive, and that energy now has to also compete with data centers who are hungry for the energy offtake too.
That's right. So how does that play out? Well, who's prepared to pay what for electricity over what period of time? That's where we're headed. So.
The expression you gave us of a can just being condensed energy, I'll never forget that when we spoke last time.
Oh,
like
coagulated electricity.
Yeah,
that's
so well.
Yeah, I'm not sure I got that explanation exactly right, but I mean it's a good way of thinking about it, right? When you pick up a can, that's when you dissolve alumina, we're going to get to alumina I think in a minute because I've got something to show you there, but when you dissolve the alumina into the bath, into the electrolyte that's used in a smelter, which is called cryolite, right? And when that the alumina kind of breaks to aluminium and oxygen, the oxygen is reduced by the carbon anode and creates carbon dioxide, and the aluminium ion is then grabbing the free electrons and producing the metal. So in that sense, that's what it is. It's that those additional electrons that are creating that. But the thing that I'm constantly reminded when I talk to people about smelting is that the operating window for that process to take place in smelting is very, very small. But there is so much aluminium produced now that the understanding of that process is now so deep that the energy consumption is getting closer and closer to the technical limit. And that's where the Chinese technology kind of kicks in, because it is the lowest energy consuming technology, and that's what's driving
per unit
aluminium. Yeah, so like they're down at sort of like 12.5 kilograms per kilowatt hour.
Wow.
So yeah, it's all back to electricity and electrons.
Wow.
I'm glad that's stuck in your mind.
100%. Let's talk a bit about what we can do here in Australia. As you mentioned before, a bit of alumina. High purity alumina is a small part of the massive market that aluminium and the whole supply chain kind of is.
Yeah.
But we're doing something in Australia. We're trying.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, we're showing you this sample that I bought, and I'm extremely grateful to the guys from Alpha HPA for letting me borrow this rather than keep it. I promise I'll give it back. But that's a wafer of pure alumina in a crystal, which is used.
When you say pure, you mean 4 Ns?
I mean 4N plus. Yeah, I mean higher. I mean we're going to be careful when we're going to change horses here and talk about something which is not a commodity and never will be.
Yeah.
We're talking about a batch process where where a very, very high purity product is used for a particular application, of which there are several applications, and therefore there are different, I don't want to say grades of HPA, but you know what I mean? It has an application, therefore certain impurities cannot be present, down to parts per billion, right? And that's whether it's halides or uranium or depending on the application. But this wafer, which is used to print circuitry on, gallium nitride for LEDs or for semiconductors, it's all just kind of printed on that as the substrate. And I was lucky enough to go up and have a look through the plant last week, and it is seriously impressive. But it's a great example of, I've got the bauxite here as well that one of my kids found in an op shop for $2 or something. But if you compare those two things, right? So here's bauxite. This, it's mined in Weeper, let's say, and you can get on a boat for $20 a ton. And that wafer, the HPA that produced that is like $25,000 a ton. So $20 a ton to $25,000 a ton, and that's all done in Australia. So yeah, that's pretty impressive. It's
big value add,
massive value add, and like I say, I'm very fortunate to have had a look around
It's a very small market, right?
Oh, tiny, yeah. It's 50,000 plus. And again, it comes down back to your definition of what. What's HPA? There's a tendency for people to think of it like us, because we're commodity thinkers.
Just think price. Yeah,
that's right. You get to this product called HPA that once you achieve a certain purity, then you're in the market. It just does not work like that at all. It's for a particular application, and you have to be qualified. You have to be a qualified supplier, and as these guys reminded me last week, the qualification process can take years.
3 years for longer.
That's an awful lot of time to spend to get your product in the door. But once you do, then that's an enormous barrier as well to others, and for you to keep into it. So. It's fascinating stuff. I never thought I would be so far down a value chain when you're talking about bauxite. Yeah, we are holding a wafer of sapphire. Amazing.
We've learnt this with lithium land as well, and it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem when you need to get the project funded and financed and these sorts of things, but you need to be able to produce it regularly and consistently, just super consistently.
The qualification to justify it, yeah.
Yeah, and the process, we were talking about this earlier as well, that, the the process to produce HPA is typically you start with high purity primary aluminium and you go backwards to the oxide. So you've removed a lot of the impurities to start with, but the process that's used at Alpha goes the other way. It's starting with alumina, and then purifying that, through their process so they have somewhat of a cost advantage there as well.
Getting in the weeds on this chemistry actually makes me think of the chat around substitution. If we go back to the big level, copper, aluminium, and I think we touched on it last time. But
we did
when we were messaging before. Speaking today, you made the comment which stuck out that you're less of a skeptic than you once were. Why is that?
Because it's happening.
The facts just ruining.
It's hard to deny when the facts get in the way of a good story. I guess I'm less of a skeptic for certain applications. I mean, we're starting to see substitution in China in EVs. We're starting to see substitution of aluminium is being substituted by steel. So for panels and so forth, they're going back to steel because aluminium is getting expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, steel's already been proven in the application, and plus, steel grades are always improving, strength and so forth, and so they can make them thinner and thinner and more, lighter. And if they can compete on cost with aluminium starting to where it is today, we're starting to see substitution back to steel panels. So, you can see that type of substitution. You can see some substitution. We'll talk about mag, I think, in a minute as well. But some substitution back to mag because the aluminium price has started to get a little high. So we are starting to see some substitution in that sense. But I mean, I was the comments I made last time was I'm still sceptical about substituting large volumes of alu for copper, for example, in certain applications where it's just not that simple. There are so many other things to take into consideration, not just the price, because a lot of situations it's a redesign, and then it's a requalification, and then by the way, if you're not using copper, then the copper demand is going down, and you are using aluminium, so it's going up. So it's just not that simple in those types of applications. But in some, we're seeing it.
So which use cases is it most prevalent? It's just for the EV, substitutions to steel that you're seeing.
Yeah, that's
recently?
where we're seeing it over the past 6 months or a year or so. I mean, given also in China what's happening, construction down.
Yeah.
Vehicle production up.
Yeah.
So the steel sector pivots.
Yeah.
Right, and if there's an opportunity for them to displace because the alloy price is high as well, then they'll work hard to make that happen, and that's why I think we're seeing it.
There's a lot of steel in China at the moment.
There is. Yeah, there is a lot.
So when we talk about the pricing differentials as well, I think we've got to talk about the tariffs and the US now, because aluminium has come up a lot because there's a lot happening in Canada, and a lot comes over the border, and a lot goes back over the border and comes back and goes back and forth. Yep. But both of those commodities moved very strongly. Copper moved very strongly away from its China or London-listed price as well, because the tariff kind of changes that we.
If you look at the historically the movement of primary aluminium into the US come from Canada. So when you hit them with a tariff, then what happens? Things get volatile, and the industry's got to try and figure out the path of least resistance for the metal to start moving elsewhere. It's got to try and find how it kind of settles under a new system of tariffs, and then if they change again, and then it kind of got to change again, and what it does is just introduces an enormous amount of volatility. That's what you see in the price, that's what you see also in the premiums. So the LME price, which can be impacted by so many different things now, but you see it in the premiums because that's a reflection of the regional markets, that the premiums will move to give you an indication more of the physical market than the theoretical market of the LME or Shanghai.
Yeah. So, I mean, to tie the steel component back into it, we saw a transaction with US Steel and just real protectionism in the US in a sense. I know it was a Japanese partner coming in,
Yeah.
but do you anticipate any of that sort of stuff happening for the now diminished and limited sort of Western supply that we see in some pockets of the Western world?
You mean in aluminium?
Yeah, I mean in aluminium. I mean in Australia as well. Tomago too had government support going forward, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean that comes back to the point of the power contracts, right? You've just got to give it a lifeline. It has to be economic for the smelter to continue, at a power price that everybody's kind of happy with. I see that in the aluminium industry. I see that much more of an influence of how the industry is going to transpire. It's much more of a linkage to power than it is for the steel sector, for example.
Sure, but there's also a lot of jobs at stake in some of these aluminium plants. So it inherently is pretty political when it comes to, filling the gap between expensive power all of a sudden and your profit margin.
Yeah, well, it's not only that. It's also the perception of the power price itself. Right? Is it a subsidy? I mean, you tell me. Is it a subsidy or is it not? That governments give to smelters to keep them going, because you could argue that power could be sold into the grid at a much higher price than what the smelter is paying for it. And I'd argue that's a very simplistic view of how how electricity systems work, especially when you're considering the importance of a base load and the cost to generate it. Right? This is complicated. So I don't. Every time I see something like we've seen at Tomago, and we saw it at Portland not long ago, and the same thing happened in New Zealand a few years ago, that it's a negotiation where there are a lot of stakeholders here. It's not just the general public, having to pay more for their electricity to keep their air conditioners going because there's a massive subsidy going to a smelter. It's just not that simple, right? So, you look at come back to the Australian smelters. I think that's, what does the future look like? It's, I think we just keep pushing those power blocks, into the future until you can't push them any further, and that's the end of the industry.
Before we talk about Mag, Alan, I just want to pry into any insights you might have about the large Western producers of aluminium, Alcoa, Rio, South 32, even Glencore. Look, what are the dynamics that we should think about when we think about these majors? Their different vulnerabilities in the changing dynamics. Are there potential kind of key risks that some of them might be under more than others, and do any of them have to deal or divest to survive in that landscape?
I think the best way to look at it is actually on an asset by asset basis. That's the key for these guys. I mean, every one of those companies that you mentioned has got some fantastic assets and some dogs. And when you look at them all kind of individually and see where those exposures might be, that what are they going to do about them? Because ultimately what you're looking for, as an investment into the sector is to get come back to the cost curve. Low cost bauxite, low cost alumina, low cost prime aluminium on the cost curve. What a wonderful business that is to be in. But for each one of those companies that you mentioned, there's an exposure somewhere. And I think if you look at where those exposures are and what are they going to do about it? Is it the long term they're going to continue to be in it because they want to remain vertically integrated, or is there another option or two? So I think that's the key here, to look at them and watch what they may divest or what they might acquire to kind of get it back to a really attractive, low cost, long term business, which is companies like Alcoa and Rio and BHP. I mean that's their DNA, right?
Alcoa has it commands a really phenomenal multiple, but it's pure play aluminium business. South 32 does not have a phenomenal multiple just in its market trading valuation, and Glencore is Glencore Rio. They don't have the same multiple as Alcoa either. Like, just from a simplistic banker pitch, you pitch spin out your aluminium business and list it in the US and get Alcoa's multiple value creation. Do you think that
it's all well and good when the aluminium price is $3,100 and the Midwest premium is where it is right now because they are making good margins on their metal, but the rest of them don't necessarily have the same asset profile. So you want to spin them out and expose them. If you take Rio as an example, I mean those two alumina refineries in Queensland are Q3 or Q4. But they've got some great smelting assets and they've got some fantastic bauxite mines as well. So wouldn't it be great to have the exposure or right across that value chain to be low cost all the way? That's what and that business to be spun out. Imagine that if for each one of those 3 points in the value chain, you're in Q1. That's what we're craving, right? That's from an investment perspective. That's the perfect business.
See if some bankers can get creative.
Oh, sounds like a Chinese business.
Let's talk about magnesium. I have very limited knowledge, so start anywhere you like and we'll jump in.
The best place to start with magnesium is aluminium.
Okay.
Because aluminium needs magnesium. So the can trap, I think I mentioned this to you last time, there's 3 different alloys to make that can. All 3 of them have got magnesium in the alloy. Magnesium strengthens aluminium. You can't do without it. There's no substitute. And if you go back, so I embarrassed myself again here, I go back 20 years, right? Alcoa, Pechiney, companies that are long gone since you guys have been around, but Alcan, let's not go there. They all had their own primary magnesium production facilities because they needed it and they were exposed in the absence of it because there's no substitute for magnesium into aluminium, right?
Is that because they would make the end product, so they needed that?
Yeah, exactly. They would take the magnesium and they'd alloy it straight into their, use it in their smelters, and they produce the alloys that they need to produce cans and window frames and die castings and everything. It's all there's mag in pretty much all of it, except for foil, right? Which is the stuff that you wrap on the meal that I had on the plane last night. That's almost pure aluminium. But other than that, there's mag in it. So the aluminium industry is dependent on the magnesium industry, right? Without it, it's in real trouble. So where is the magnesium made? It's 90%, 90% of all primary magnesium is made in China. So which is why you now see magnesium top 3 sort of critical minerals lists. Magnesium is sitting there because it's such an exposure, which is kind of odd, right? But one other point, right? The magnesium industry, to put it into perspective, the whole of the world's magnesium industry, primary magnesium industry, is the size of one big aluminium smelter, right? So about 1 million tonnes. That's how much magnesium. So it's tiny relative to aluminium, 80-odd million tonnes, right? So it's a very small industry, but it is absolutely essential for aluminium. Point number 1. Point number 2, when you think about the demand profile for magnesium, rule of thumb, right? A third. So a third of it goes into primary aluminium, a third of it goes into die casting, and a third of it goes into other stuff, desulfurizing and a lot of fireworks that are mag. So it's a weird kind of situation that the magnesium industry has been in for quite some time now, given that dependency on China has just been growing and growing for the past 20 years or so.
What does a kilo of mag go for?
At the moment, the FOB price in China is about 2,300.
Wow.
Yeah.
1 kilo.
Sorry, 1 tonne, 2,300 a tonne. Yeah. So a lot of the die casters kind of keep their eye on in China, keep their eye on the ratio between the aluminium and the magnesium price and the ratio of the densities.
Yeah.
Right, to give them a feel for what should I be using? If I can swap from one to the other, what should I be using? Yeah, a tonne of mag, roughly 2,300 a tonne at the moment. If we were having this conversation 2 or 3 years ago, it hit $10,000 a tonne. Right, $10,000 a tonne. China driven. That was it was a spike that was caused by the means by which you produce magnesium. That piece that I showed you, by the way, you can have a look at that. This is like a crystal that's grown in. It's That's pure magnesium that's as it's produced in China. But the process is called the pigeon process. It's a pyrometallurgical process. And a lot of the plants in China, they get their energy from semi-coking ovens. So they'll build the facility next door. So they're effectively getting the energy free. Now, if there's a disruption to the semi-coking producers, it has an immediate impact on mag, right? So a lot of the semi-coking producers were forced to shut in China under some changes to the environmental requirements. And when they started to shut down, they shut down about 60% of it, the mag price just went crazy overnight.
So you mentioned that 90% plus comes from China.
Yeah.
That's the downstream. Where are the mines that they're actually getting the
magnesium?
magnesium?
Oh, the mines, well, that's the thing about, you got to remember about magnesium, it's not so much about the raw material as it is for other
Because it's a pyrometallurgical
metals.
process.
No, because it's everywhere.
Oh.
So you can produce magnesium from magnesite, from carnallite, from dolomite.
Yeah.
Right? There's dolomites pretty much everywhere.
Sounds like aluminium.
Yeah, well, but in a sense, I mean, there's bauxite pretty much everywhere, right? You wouldn't think so with the way the industry behaves sometimes, but there's dolomite pretty much everywhere. So magnesium's not so much about the raw material as it is about the technology, cost to produce it, right? That's the key for magnesium. It's the technology, right? So you can produce it that way, which is the pyrometallurgical route, or you can produce it electrolytically the same way you produce aluminium. So, there's some plants in the world that still run electrolysis, but most of it in China is produced using the pyrometallurgical pigeon process.
That is very cool. And
I was going to say, is that price spike dynamic that was a China caused spike? Is that a lever that Beijing pulls from time to time? What's the rationale for it?
I mean, the skeptic might think that, right? Or you might look at that and think, well, why wouldn't they? What we've observed in China is that, with these industries, because we look at a lot of them, right? That China has got a lot tighter on its environmental compliance requirements. And the semi-coking ovens would, the guys, the operators were doing the wrong thing. I mean, their ovens were not compliant. And so they were warned, and some of them rebuilt and some of them didn't. And so the authorities came down pretty hard on them to clean their act up. And magnesium was collateral damage. So I never saw this as somebody pulling a lever to go, we're just going to push the mag price up. I mean, if that was the case, you could do that any time, right? You could do that any time, but it doesn't happen. It happened because of this particular event. And once they cleaned up their act and they became compliant, the price went down pretty quickly. And by the way, at the same time, people were ringing us outside of China saying, the price for mag is like $8,000 a tonne. Can you help us source some in China? At the same time, we're getting phone calls from Chinese producers going, we got plenty of mag here. We just can't find anybody to sell. It was this. It was just such a crazy time that they just couldn't, get their act together and kind of solve the problem. But because it didn't last that long, because like I say, once the semi-coking industry got its act together, then the price came down pretty quickly. But the impact that it did have, I'm going to come back to substitution now, because if you're a die caster, right, and you're making a gearbox housing or something, and you were making it out of mag, or you'd switched to mag because it had been cheaper than aluminium for the past 5 years, all of a sudden you have a price excursion to $10,000 a tonne on mag. You're swapping back to aluminium pretty quickly, and now that the mag price has been lower than aluminium for the last 18 months or 2 years, the die casters are not going back to mag. Because I refuse to wear that risk again that it might hit $10,000 a tonne. The interesting thing about that though is the aluminium industry has no choice. If it goes to $10,000 a tonne, you got to pay it, right? You got to pay it. No substitute.
That is interesting. Got to look up some magnesium exposure in my portfolio, just in case.
Yeah, well, it's interesting there's not a lot. I mean, there's the project in Victoria, the Latrobe guys, they've been going for quite a while. And the interesting thing about that project is that they use fly ash as the feedstock, which is effectively free, right? So, but it's technology. It's always
Yeah.
going to come back to technology and to commercialise what it is that they've been developing for the past decade or so.
This reminds me of one more kind of question related to your specialty, Al. Not because you even cover this metal, I don't think.
Uh-oh.
But the concentration in China theme, et cetera, big noise, big commitments for a lot of these aluminium refineries to add a liquor circuit to extract gallium in recent history. I don't think this is like, a new endeavour. This sort of thing has been looked at historically over time. Is it real this time? Is it gonna happen in a meaningful and material way? Does it have to? What's changed?
Yeah, look, I mean, what's changed is that the demand's changed.
Yeah.
So, you need a lot more. But it is known. The technology to extract gallium from, say, Western Australian bauxite or alumina, you can build the plant. You bolt it on and you can produce it in fairly sizable volumes. So, I see it as somebody's going to do that. More than one company does it, but it's a reasonably straightforward solve, I think.
And to round out our venturing into exotic metals, this one's not that exotic, but it is a bit. Molybdenum. It's the metal that's always kind of hard to say. You stutter once or twice when you moly. Anyway, we just call it moly.
Much easier.
Moly. For as long as I've thought about moly, I've never thought too hardly about it, but I just always sort of thought this is a co-product with a lot of copper operations, and so I never really paid much attention to it. Should I?
I think you should increasingly so, and I say that because again, you come back to the cost curve, right? So if you looked at it's a byproduct. So how you take that into consideration in the cost curve? Well, we've all got our own different ways of doing a C1 curve, right? But the things that make moly interesting is that if you go back and have a look at the profile of moly production from some of the big copper producers that have got moly circuits, forecasting their moly grade is very difficult. It's up and down. It's all over the place, right? Having said that, it's still going to be a byproduct, so the cost is still going to be quite low, although the supply is going to shift as the grades shift in the with the big copper producers. But who sits at the top of the cost curve? China. China's produces a lot of moly, but they produce it out of their own primary moly mines. Really. So, and what we've noticed over the years is that those moly grades are starting to drop, which means their costs have been tracking higher and higher. So now, if that's setting the price, if you're at the top of the curve with primary moly mines in China that are just getting more and more expensive, then the price is going to go with it. Which is why we've kind of, I guess, for the past few years, we've kind of looked at it and thought, well, the imports into China we would expect to continue to increase. Having said that, it's going into the steel sector, right? And the steel sector's been quite flat, but the grades of steel have been increasing, which means moly content, vanadium content is going up. So it's still tracking higher. But now they've got to import more and more because their own primary moly mines are starting to struggle. So it's interesting from that. Imagine that dynamic plus the ups and downs that go with the production of moly out of copper makes it a really interesting industry.
I'd love to see a business that kind of wrap together the moly rights at a bunch of different assets, and those assets structurally sat lower on the cost curve than China. And that's interesting.
There are some moly streaming product.
There's some interesting moly projects here in Australia.
Primary moly?
Yeah, with quite high grade moly. They're worth having a look at. So yeah.
Undeveloped though.
Undeveloped.
Yeah.
So take some time and money, but I mean it's
super low grade, right? Like the actual.
Yeah.
It's process a lot of rock.
Less than one.
Yeah.
So
and vanadium is another one that we
vanadium
spoke about very briefly.
Yeah, vanadium's interesting because again, I mean, it's I'm going to drag you back to China every opportunity I get. But
welcome to commodities.
That's right. Vanadium is steel linked as a primary demand, and again, grades of rebar in China are always improving, which means the vanadium content is going up. The sector is flat. The construction sector is flat, but still vanadium tracks a bit higher because it's because the grades dictate that it requires more vanadium. On top of that, you've got these wonderful vanadium flow cell batteries that are now starting to get real traction in China, and they require substantial volumes of V2O5. So that's starting to drive a demand as well. So then it become, well, where's the supply? And a lot of China's vanadium supply comes from its own iron ore mines. They're quite high-ish in vanadium, but when you're producing the steel, it reports to the slag, and so then you can extract the vanadium from the slag, and that's their primary source of vanadium. How does that? I had this conversation with some people earlier today about what does that mean if if more iron ore is coming into China? Not that the iron ore market is what it once was. It's still big volumes though, right? And so let's say, for example, the iron ore from Simandou comes in, and that might displace higher cost domestic product, which means that might impact vanadium, right? If they just shut down the domestic mines, then all of a sudden they go short vanadium. So the question really is, does that happen when you've got more iron ore coming in from outside of China? Would they actually do that? That's a hard one. Our suspicion is no. Our suspicion is they keep producing their own iron ore because of the vanadium, because of some other reasons that they might want to.
It's been very sticky production.
Yeah, sticky. That's a good word for it. Yeah. So maybe it continues to be sticky, and therefore the demand's not as, not quite like it is with moly. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
Al, before we completely wrap up, and you lift your South Australian Cooper's aluminium can, which we got just specifically for you.
Thank you very much.
No
And by the way, while we're talking about Cooper's, I mean, the big news in Adelaide is that Cooper's will be making its own whiskey soon.
Oh,
There you go.
So look out for that.
they better put it in an aluminium can.
I imagine
Magnesium
that. Imagine trying to sell whiskey in an aluminium. Jeez, good luck with that, guys. Anyway, sorry.
Is there anything else you want to espouse us and our audience with that we haven't talked about today?
One more point. Just a shameless plug, right? One thing that we have done over the past year is develop our own app. Did I show you the app?
No.
So we've got a bauxite app, so you can download it and you can actually put in a spec for a bauxite, no matter where it is in the world. So we're publishing an index, and so the index price for a standard Guinean bauxite today might be like $62, right? Thinking, God, what does that mean? What's the Wafers stuff worth? What's it worth out of Madagascar or Pakistan or Laos or wherever it might be? You can just put the spec in, it will give you a calculator.
Oh, that's cool.
Because one of the biggest barriers to moving to index pricing for bauxite has been value in use. It's complicated, right?
Yeah.
What does it mean to the refinery if you've got a little more silica or you've got baumite? Can you actually treat the baumite? It's complicated. So we put together this app, and it seems to be doing pretty well. So
that's
awesome.
That's really cool.
We've had a win.
That's fantastic. Just a quick one on that. Would the price that a refiner's willing to pay not be slightly differentiated depending on what they're tailored for?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely, they would be. That's right. I'm glad you said that, because that means you were listening last time I was here, right? That's right. Some refineries just simply can't take, if you're what's called a low temperature refinery, and you've got a monohydrate content of a bauxite, which is baumite or diaspore, you can't get the digestion temperature high enough to actually push it into solution. It's just not going to happen, or it's going to take so long. It's just crazy. So you can't treat it. So that would be like trying to put a Queensland bauxite into a WA refinery. You just can't do it. So there is always that. So the app will say to you, how are you going to treat this? High temperature or low temperature, right? Straight away. And if you try to put a low temperature bauxite into a high temperature bauxite into a low temperature refinery, you just get can't.
Not applicable.
That's right. You get a what the hell are you doing kind of message. So but you're quite right. You've got to be careful about what refineries, how refineries are built, and what bauxites they can and can't treat.
We learn so much every time we speak. I already know this is going to be an episode I'm going to go back and listen to a bunch so that all the information actually sinks in. So, yeah, we're very grateful that you made the time for us.
It's a pleasure. Thanks very much for the invitation. And who knows, next time we might be sipping a Cooper's whiskey.
Fingers crossed.
Who knows? Not out of an aluminium can, though, I hope.
Thank you so
All
much,
right,
Al.
guys.
Go
No, it's a
South
pleasure.
Australia, go aluminium.
Thank you.
I could speak to Alan forever.
Forever. So many more stories to glean. We'll have him on again in the future to dive into a few more of those. A massive thank you to Sandvik Grant Support, Exceed Capital, Intralinks, and Focus, the platform by Market Tech.
Hooroo.
Go Australia.
Now remember, I'm an idiot, JD's an idiot. If you thought any of this was anything other than entertainment, you're an idiot and you need to read our disclaimer.